I want to welcome everybody to this week's Topics in Tech, the CIS Sandbox series featuring alumni and former Sandbox tutors who graduated from Bentley in CIS for the past several years. And it's a good opportunity for us to check in with them and see how they're doing and see what they're doing. Today, let's see if we can do this. We want to welcome Jake O'Connell to the CIS Sandbox. Jake was a tutor in the Sandbox until he started in 2016, something like that, 2015.
Yeah, it was spring of 2016.
Then you sent me an email one day saying, after I hired you to work in the Sandbox, saying you couldn't come to work because you hit your head on a server.
Yeah.
But this is proof that Jake actually worked in the Sandbox as a tutor, doing a whole bunch of interesting things. He worked with us for about 3 years with all these people. And then one day we hit some Bluetooth beacons on campus and got lots of interest in that for a project we did for admissions. And then Jake decided to present about that at a conference, and he won an award.
We won an award together.
Okay, we won an award together. And then he sort of took over the Sandbox and hung out a lot with us. So, and then we hung up his name on the wall after he graduated. And now I will stop sharing and embarrassing him. And
yeah, thanks, Mark.
We'll let Jake tell you what he's been up to since he graduated in 2019. Welcome back.
Thank you, and thank you, Mark. I think I just shared my screen, so can everybody see my screen? Anybody who can't, let me know. Thank you to Mark for that embarrassing introduction. Happy to be here. I was class of 2019, CIS major. Really happy that everybody showed up today and excited to talk to you. I'm going to be talking about startups and entrepreneurship and my story and how that's unfolded so far. I'm only a year out of school now, so I don't have years and years of experience being an entrepreneur or working in startups, but I just want to give you an idea of my path and my journey and how things have worked so far. So this is an agenda slide, pretty much what I want to cover. I want to start by doing a little bit of anecdotal, talking about my origin and why I got into entrepreneurship and working with startups and things like that. I want to talk about the concept of prototyping and specifically from the tech point of view, writing code, programming, and how that's had impact on me and opening up doors and building cool things and demoing. I want to talk about this concept of giving without expectation, especially early on in your career as an entrepreneur and aspiring entrepreneur. Stealing a little bit from Gary V, for those of you who know him, without getting kind of hung up in the weeds there. I want to talk about the first startup that I got involved in. So that was right out of school, and I'll get into details on that. So worked in a startup straight out of Bentley, and I'll talk about that. I'm now working at a new startup. So just actually within the past 3 weeks, I've started a new career at a new startup that I'll tell you a little bit about. We're in stealth mode right now, so I can't get into a lot of details, but high level overview of how that happened, how it works, what's going on. And then I want to bring things back at the end to talk specifically about technology. And as programmers, anybody who's interested in building cool tools, whether it's for your own personal use, for coursework, for an idea you have that you may want to build a business around, we live in a really cool age right now where you can harness really powerful tools and technologies with APIs and really quickly integrating cool stuff into your existing application. So I want to talk about that. And then we'll kind of cap things off talking about Bentley, its impact on me, the soft skills, this concept of a master of none, being super well-rounded and entering the workforce and startups with a lot of different experience in a lot of different areas and how that's been important. So high level overview, this will hopefully help you see that the presentation's moving along because I have a tendency to talk a lot. If anybody has questions throughout, feel free to just interrupt me. I love to go on tangents. So jump in anytime. You can use the chat box too. I think I'll be able to see that. But starting from the beginning, for me, I'm not someone who was born an entrepreneur. This concept today, entrepreneur, in my perspective, has become kind of a buzzword where a lot of different people you'll see on LinkedIn are entrepreneurs. Everybody's a co-founder or CEO or a CTO. And it's important to understand that you don't need to label yourself as an entrepreneur. It can be a way of thinking, and you don't have to be a full-time entrepreneur. You can be someone who works on things on the side, and you never put pressure on yourself to kind of be an entrepreneur full-time or tell everyone you're an entrepreneur. And for me, I didn't build lemonade stands or count money or have to play with cash registers. I was always more inventive. So I was never thinking about the business side. It was more taking things apart and putting them back together. So I was really interested in figuring out how things work, and kind of nerdy. And I put some pictures here of me as a youngster when I was in high school. And that's where it really started for me. I had my first corporate internship, which was a result of kind of getting some exposure at school for all these inventive things. And I worked at 16 years old. Since the summer between my freshman and sophomore year of high school, I was working at a big engineering company in the IT department. So my friends were scooping ice cream or taking the summer off, and I was 9 to 5 doing a 3-hour commute, working in corporate America for the most part. I suit and tie, not suit, business casual. So occasionally a tie, button down, and I learned a ton. And I wouldn't trade the experience for the world. But that was kind of quickly where I made this pivot where I said, corporate world isn't for me. The idea of a huge company with all of these processes and structure, I wanted to kind of innovate and build from the ground up. And it's not to say you can't do that at a big company, but for me, that was sort of my wake up call that I was going to work as hard as I could to come up with my own idea, build something, start from the ground up. So I got really into nuclear engineering, and my big goal was that I was going to build these fusion reactors like Tony Stark and put them in everybody's houses all around the world. And that was going to be my big startup. And so I set myself in that goal. And so for the majority of my high school career, I was so set on building nuclear fusion reactors. And ultimately, I realized, okay, that's not the easiest thing to do. That's a kind of a really lofty goal to go out and try and conquer nuclear fusion in high school. And that probably wasn't going to get me a full-time job so I could drop out of college. So I shifted a little bit and decided that a more realistic goal would be to start a billion-dollar quantitative hedge fund, where I could manage pension funds and other people's money and make all these interesting investments in the stock market with technology. So I tried several times working with my peers in high school. I took that to Bentley too. That's part of the reason I went to Bentley, is I started to have this focus in the stock market. And ultimately I realized that going from nuclear fusion to a billion-dollar hedge fund is also not something that's super attainable right out of the gates. It can be. Some people do have that experience and that luck. But for me, the biggest takeaway here, and I think what's really important early on in thinking like an entrepreneur, is to kind of not necessarily swing for a home run right out of the gate, and focus on trying to come up with some singles and doubles first. So instead of going after the big lofty idea, get your feet wet and start to learn a little bit and focus on things that are more attainable, but some like bite-sized entrepreneurial endeavors. And that for me, that was this next kind of critical period as an entrepreneur, where I said, okay, my new philosophy is going to be, I'm just going to start throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. So figuring out, okay, I'm going to do things as quickly as possible, prototype, demo, come up with ideas, share them with people, get as much feedback as possible. And the benefit is that I'm learning a lot about all these different tools and technologies and exploring, and I love it. And the best case scenario is something picks up traction and I have some luck where someone's interested. It could be a business idea. It could help me in networking because I'm going to meet people who want to talk about the idea and learn more about it. And so I got really into this concept of throwing stuff at the wall. Is that the best philosophy? That's subjective. I've had some luck with it, and that's what I want to talk about. Is that for me, the throwing stuff at the wall quickly became prototyping. So specifically from a technical focus, I had, through all my experience working with trying to start a hedge fund, I picked up some Python. So I was never a programmer, never an engineer, a developer of any sort. In high school, I failed the only programming course I ever took. It's not a lie. So I came into Bentley not thinking that I wanted to do programming. That wasn't me. So for anybody who can relate to that, where you may be interested in technology or the technical side, but at the same time, you don't think inside you're a developer or an engineer, that was me. But I figured I'd start exploring with Python because it's a very approachable language. And I know Bentley has a Python course now and is investing more and more into this data analytics concept, which we'll talk a little bit about in Python. And for me, I also picked Django. So Django is, in my opinion, I love it. I'm a Django fanboy. I will talk about it to the moon and back. It's a web framework that you can use with Python for any of our technical minded people out there. You may have heard about it or used it. And it's basically the web framework for perfectionists with deadlines. So the really great thing is it's super high level and you can build something really quickly. So for prototyping, where you come up with an idea, and you want to say, okay, let me quickly see if this is feasible and what it would look like, you can very quickly knock out a prototype, even in a weekend if you wanted to. And that's what I started doing while I was at Bentley. So I found friends, people that I didn't necessarily know. So I would post in some of the groups at Bentley and say, is anybody interested in working on these types of things? And built all sorts of web apps. I worked with, toward the end of my Bentley career, with the career services department at Bentley, to build kind of a prototype for a cover letter application to help students create and publish cover letters. We worked on something, a web app, so students could log in and create their own personal resumes online. And we shared all those as much as we could. And also my roommate and I built some Ethereum rigs to mine cryptocurrencies for anybody who's into that. So kind of just trying to throw stuff in all directions: hardware, software, web apps, putting it out there, sharing it, getting feedback, and just continue doing that, which leads me to this concept of, if you build it, they will come. So I built prototypes for a bunch of different things. Everything I could think of that I thought someone might be interested in and that I had some interest in, I would build these prototypes. And my senior year at Bentley, I hadn't done a whole lot of job exploration. My mindset was that I was going to move to Los Angeles and flip yard sales and sell mugs online, to do the whole Gary V, might start a podcast, become an actor, anything I had to do where it wouldn't be a full-time job or a 9-to-5 corporate job. Which again, this is just my story, not necessarily a philosophy that you should go by. But 2 weeks before I graduated from Bentley, I had built, my friend and I had built this analytics platform for a sports marketing company that was a startup in Wilmington, Massachusetts. And they had an existing product that was this huge kind of recruiting product for football players to go to college. And they were selling it all across the country, to Notre Dame, a lot of the Power 5 football schools. So we built a prototype unsolicited, just kind of said, hey, this is really cool. We like data. Let's put together something, and then we'll try and take it to this company and say, hey, would you have any interest in licensing this from us? And then it would be a really cool passive income type, maintaining the system, making tweaks. So making tweaks. What ended up happening was we built a prototype, presented it to this local small business, which was a startup. And the CEO came out of that, which we weren't expecting, and said, why don't you come build more things for us like this for us full time? So we're early on. We don't have any technology department. We're looking for some leadership, some guidance. Why don't you come on and just keep innovating and doing this for us? You be your own startup within a startup. And that was it was an unexpected change in events. And so in terms of getting your foot in the door with a startup, I can't talk a lot about sourcing startups and interviewing, because that's not how I got my foot in the door with this startup. This first startup, and it's called 3-Step Sports. You can look it up. It's a great company. It was my dream job. It's basically an interesting approach would be, if there is a startup that you're interested in or you hear about that you think is really cool or you like what they're doing, and it doesn't even have to be a startup. It can be a small business. It can even be a small to medium-sized business. Look at what they're doing. And if you come to them and say, hey, I put together this cool prototype that I think would be a great supplement to what you guys are doing, and I think it's really cool. That, to me, if I was working at a startup and hiring people or looking to grow out my team, that's huge. You've shown that you're interested in the idea. You've already started to tinker around with prototypes. And the worst case scenario is they say, yeah, this is great. We're not super interested right now, or we're not expanding right now. And for you, you're walking away having learned a lot, experimented, explored, and kind of grown your knowledge, which you can use in the future. So specifically talking about this first role I had at a startup, 3-Step, it was 2 days after I graduated from Bentley. So graduated on a Saturday. That Monday morning, 9 a.m., I was in Stoneham, Massachusetts, full-time, starting with this new company. In the first year, we experienced hypergrowth. So between May 2019 and May 2020, we saw revenue growth in excess of 1,000%. We went from 20 employees when I started to 400 employees by the time May 2020 came around. And that's insane. It's not something necessarily you would see at every startup. It depends. Some will grow a lot faster. Some might not grow as fast. But speaking at a high level, there were certain things that I just loved. And it's my own personality where the things that I love are also the challenges when you look at working at a startup and what that is. So the idea coming and starting in May 2019 was that there was no technology department, no existing infrastructure. So it was genuinely building from the ground up, which is extremely exciting. You get to make a lot of decisions. You get to kind of pick your public cloud provider. You could do hybrid cloud. You could do some on-premise. You can explore. You can play with different tools. There's no legacy systems that you have to migrate or change or learn about. You're coming in greenfield. There's only opportunity and innovation in front of you, and you're starting from the ground up. That's also a huge challenge, though, when you think about it, because there is no playbook. What Three Step was doing was we were going around and acquiring other sports brands. And so by the time from when I started to when I left, we'd acquired 70 different companies. And all those different companies did things, the same things in different ways with different tools and different technologies. And no one has prepared a user manual to say, here's how you should do that. It's kind of, some nights are really long, and some nights or some days are really long where you're up all night, and then some days are really short. And it's always fast paced. It's always constantly changing. You could be pivoting. You could be working with another company with a huge brand partnership like New Balance or Under Armour. And we worked with those companies as well as Gatorade. And that's awesome, because that's what I love, is really not knowing where you're going, never knowing what the next day is going to hold. And that's sort of the cliche you might hear with any company, is there's no such thing as a day-to-day. It's constantly new. But with a startup especially, that's particularly true, because it's do or die in many cases. You're part of a team. You have to execute. You never know what the next day is going to hold. And sometimes the challenge there would be, sometimes you feel, whoa, wait up. You almost feel like you're falling behind. So that would be the challenge. And I purposefully labeled these things as things I loved and challenges, because the challenges weren't things I didn't like. I lived for the challenge. But that's kind of the mindset when you're going into one of these things you should start to think about, is kind of, it's all about perspective and work ethic and putting in the work that is required. And then I would say the last two there, the concept of responsibility and contributing to all aspects of the company. When you're in a startup, especially a small one, so 20 employees, you don't have a clear position, like you're this person, this is your responsibilities. You're part of a team that's working towards some end. So we shared, when I started, we were in this little teeny office. We shared it with a doctor's office. We shared a bathroom. We didn't have our own kitchen. We had to share desks with fold-out tables. So you could be one day presenting in a boardroom to New Balance, and then the next day you might be cleaning bathrooms. And that's the concept. And for me, again, something I love, but at the same time, that's the challenge, is some days you're doing little things and some days you're doing big things, and you really never know going into it. I used to keep two different shirts. One shirt for presentations, because I would keep it at my desk. I never knew if we were gonna have to jump into a presentation or we were lucky enough to get our foot in the door somewhere. And then one shirt for just kind of doing work like setting up field hockey nets or going to a sports event and preparing material. So all different types of things. And that was just the most incredible experience I could possibly have. Then, as we all know, COVID hit in March 2020. And as a sports company, that's really hard. So it's one thing to be a startup where you're struggling to maintain your traction and keep everything going, keep the lights on. But when your entire business is based on travel and sports events and media, something like COVID is awful. So it was a tremendous learning experience, but it was also, we all of a sudden had a lot of downtime. So we were all working from home as opposed to being in the office. And there wasn't a lot of work to be done. We were just preparing for the new normal and figuring all of that out. And out of the blue, I got a phone call, and this is in April, from a student that I'd worked with at Bentley on some of these projects I've been working with, to say, hey, my father is an entrepreneur. He's working on this really cool technical concept. He hasn't fleshed it fully out yet, but he's had a couple of developers writing code. Would you mind taking a look at the code and seeing if it's up to par? And that gets me to this concept of giving without expectation, where if you go out as an entrepreneurial spirited person, whether you don't have to be technical or a programmer, but whatever you're doing, if you go into every situation and every relationship and every conversation with this mindset of creating to create, so you're building to build, you're building to learn. There's your downside is the worst case that can happen is you learn something. The best cases that can happen is you create something amazing that changes the world. I mean, that's depending on how you look at it. So if you become known as that person and that's your reputation, then when someone has an idea or someone has a question, a technical question, they feel comfortable coming to you and asking you, because they know you're not going to be expecting something in return. You're not going to be stealing their ideas or questioning or pushing it off. you always want to be that person that people go to. If you're the first person someone comes to when they have an idea, and there's kind of that meme or whatever you want to call it, where it says Mark Zuckerberg invited 5 people to his dorm room and only 3 showed up or 2 showed up or whatever it was. And then you look at where the 2 are and where the 3 are. Be the person that shows up. Always be willing to learn about someone's idea. And that's exactly what I try to be and what I was in this situation. So it started off in April as a code review. So this gentleman, my friend's father, had a concept that he'd been working on. I looked at the code and I said, hey, I've never worked with this before. I don't know anything about it, but would you mind if I took the weekend and played with it and see what I can come up with, or see what I think I can come up with? And again, no plan. I just wanted to put it out there because it was a really cool concept. And ultimately, I spent that weekend building, had a lot of really success. And then 2 months later, I'm at a new startup. So I got in at this company a lot sooner than I did with 3Step. So whereas 3Step, it was already an established startup. They just received venture capital investment, and they kind of had a trajectory of this is where we want to go and how. With this new startup, there wasn't even a name when I started working with them. So it's 2 founders. I became the first employee. So I built this app out. It was a prototype. We presented it, demoed it for some of the biggest companies in the industry we're working with. And they all said, holy cow, we want this. When can we have it? And that's the crazy part, especially about being a developer or a programmer. I'm not a classically trained programmer, so I can write code and I like writing code, but it's not clean. I don't know what a unit test is. I don't know. I've never done anything with React, but I built a Python Django application that looks really cool, and all of the tech behind it's real. So now the biggest thing we're figuring out is now we have to take that demo and turn it into a real product that publicly traded billion-dollar companies can use in 2021. So it's just this kind of huge insurmountable concept where I'm looking left and right thinking, what do I do? What's going on? However, leveraging a lot of what I learned at 3Step, where when I started there was no playbook. And the idea of taking 70 companies and putting them under our 3Step umbrella seemed crazy at the time too, but we figured it out. There were stressful times, but at the end of the day, that's if you don't have stressful times, then the great days don't seem as great. So the particular experience I have here, and I'm mainly trying to show you everything that I've experienced and worked with so that you can ask questions about some of these specifically. So I won't get into a ton of detail. But so this time around, I spent the past month pitching to investors and VC groups. So it's everything from Fortune 500 CEOs, angel investor groups, VC groups, zooming in, doing presentations, showing them what our product is, and raising capital. So that's a part of a startup experience I didn't have with the first one. I am the first employee. So there's 2 founders. I'm the first employee. The other great thing about this startup, which for those of you interested in potentially working at a startup or having your own startup, is this concept of ownership and equity. So if anybody's seen Silicon Valley on HBO, you can see stock option plans at a lot of huge companies, but when you're working specifically at a startup, you normally get a pretty good sized equity component, especially if you start early on, which is really cool because when you start, you might have 10% of nothing, but like $0. But if you work hard and you feel like you're part of the team and you put your blood, sweat, and tears into it, your upside is really infinite. And that's another really cool concept to me, is that nobody knows what can be done. It's uncharted territory. You're going in and building something that no one's ever built before. So who knows what can happen? And that kind of unknown is really cool to me. The role and responsibilities, again, especially this is even earlier on than it was at 3Step. There's no clear role. You don't have a position. There's no HR department. There's no rotational program or training or employee handbook. It is, you're part of a team. You know what you want to do roughly. You're still figuring it out every day, and you figure out how to get there. So if that's something you're interested in, I can definitely talk more about it if anybody has questions, but that's the gist now. So we actually kicked off engineering on our product that we're building yesterday. So it's all fresh in my mind. I just came out of a meeting with our engineering team. So I can talk more to the technical side if anybody's interested about that. But at the end of the day, the most important thing, and I'll talk about this when I talk about Bentley, is communication. So you can be super technically minded or have a lot of technical experience, hard skills, but the biggest thing is communicating that. Because it's one thing to build an application in your dorm room, which I did plenty of. And another thing to say, okay, we want to scale this app so that we can handle thousands of concurrent users, and we can meet the security standards of these Fortune 500 publicly traded companies, and it can expand to all these different offices. Do we need to silo each individual office's data? We need to build this with microservices because Django, full stack Django doesn't work anymore. There's all these really interesting technical conversations, and a lot of it is kind of specific to the industry you're working with or the application you're building. But communicating what needs to get done and managing that process and keeping everybody in line with the vision is so important. So I'll talk more about that when I talk about Bentley. We're almost there. This is kind of where I wanted to take things back to the technical side and explain a little bit about how I approached this unique problem of building this app for this new startup. And it really goes back to this concept where in 2020, we have extremely powerful tools, artificial intelligence, machine learning, natural language processing, tools that are built and maintained by companies like Google, Amazon, Microsoft, the company that Elon Musk co-founded a while ago, OpenAI. It's an artificial intelligence company. They're about to launch their API. And for those of you, I don't know how technical the audience is, but for those of you who don't, or the term API or HTTP sounds foreign to you, that's okay. It's basically, you can, and I'm actually going to show you a quick example of what it looks like in a second, but it's basically for somebody who, like me, I'd never written anything in machine learning, artificial intelligence. I could hardly explain to you where we are right now as a society when it comes to artificial intelligence, other than seeing the movies. So I wanted to build an application that harnessed or needed to harness a lot of AI tools, but I have no idea how to write a neural network or anything that I could use as a tool for this process. So what I did is I built an app, like a shell of an application. It had an interface where a user could come in and upload a document, and then I would store the document, and then I would have some sort of page where I would display some results after processing that document and finding specific information. But the actual processing of the document and finding that information, I had no idea how to write. I needed to use natural language processing and look at the way the paragraphs, the context of what was in the paragraphs, and pull that information out. So what I did is basically built the shell, and then I would go send my document that gets uploaded to Google, and Google would process the document using this cutting edge technology and tell me what I needed to know. So you can do, I just want to show you an example. I'll probably just go to this slide. I used a pretty simple example to say, let's say you have this website called www.whatsmypet.com, and the simple, or this is like a BoJack Horseman company example. You'd have users could come in, they could submit a picture of their pet. In this case, it's a cat. And then you want to be able to tell the user what animal their pet is. So in this use case, the result would be cat, it would be correct. And you might know how to build a web app, whether you build it with PHP, I use Python and Django, you might use Node and React, however you want to build your app. You have some sort of form where the user can drag and drop in a picture of their cat. But how do you write code to look at that picture and tell you what animal's in there? Like, how do you even do that? I don't know. I mean, I assume based on the movies I've seen that you somehow find a picture of 20,000, or you need a picture of every pet there is, and you look at the characteristics of the picture using some sort of blah, 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 blah. Who knows? I don't know. But who does know is Google. So my app takes in the picture of the cat. I send it off to Google. I say, Google, what the heck is this? And then Google does all the processing, and they tell me, oh, that's a cat. So then I tell my user, that's a cat. The user doesn't know I'm going to Google for all of this, but that's what the app's doing. So that's the beauty of being in 2020, is that you can harness these incredibly powerful tools and technologies that other companies build through the use of APIs and making these calls from your application. So I can talk more about that, but that was kind of my secret sauce for building this app for this new startup. Is I'm not a programmer, but I built an app for a startup. So how did I do that? By harnessing tools. It's more architecting and putting the right tools together than building code from the ground up. And that's how I approached this problem. And again, if anybody has more questions, I do have extra material. I just wanted to not talk as long so I don't bore you, so I can get into it. But I'll quickly kind of wrap up here with just talking about Bentley and what I got out of Bentley. So the biggest thing I would say is this concept of networking, which I know you hear left and right, at least I did when I was at Bentley. But the networking that's important to me, or was important to me, is more with my peers. So meeting as many different students as possible, especially outside of my kind of core group of friends. And I know that's harder today, which stinks because of everything that's going on. But there are still avenues, and we're getting better and better at communicating online, posting on LinkedIn, and finding people who have common interests, and then inventing and creating with those people. So my best memories at Bentley were in a study room until 2 a.m. with Red Bull and pizza, building some sort of app or exploring code. When you can do things with friends or people that you meet, it makes it so much more fun. And then this concept of communication, which I touched upon earlier. And I have this for anybody who watches Billions on Showtime, Bobby Axelrod. There's a small group who can do the math. There's an even smaller group who can explain it. But those few who can do both, they become billionaires. So the idea is that it's one thing to be able to write the code. It's another thing to be able to explain what the code's doing to people who may not be as technical. And then if you can do both of those things, you're a double threat. It's a huge competitive advantage, especially as an entrepreneur, where you might be pitching to investors and you have to explain a highly technical concept to people who don't really understand the technical side of things as well. And then so data too, I talked about a little bit about that earlier. Data is so crucial, and it's getting more and more crucial, and you'll see it in the news. There's a lot of different context in which data is involved. I worked a lot with data at 3 steps, so data warehousing, the security of data, working with data on potentially young athletes where it's very crucial that we keep that protected. But then also anytime you're building an application, making sure that your master data, there's one source of truth, that you don't replicate data in multiple different places. If you have one system and you need to use data here, but the data lives in another system, how do you get that data out and how do you send changes back? Do you do that at all? So regardless of how you're looking at data or what career you go into, you could be working on Wall Street, you could be in accounting, you could be in finance, CIS, data analytics, cybersecurity, any field you go into, data is so crucial, and it's getting more and more important to be able to know what it is, work with it, protect it. This concept of master of none. So for me, again, this is in no way purporting that this is the way to do things. I just love this concept, and it's how I approach my coursework at Bentley, because I wanted to know a little bit about everything. I think that's super important. You don't have to be really good at one thing. If you know a little bit about everything, you can bridge the gap and similar to what I was talking about before, bring together the right tools and the right people, which leads me to this concept of people, process, and tools, where there's 3 big components when you're building anything or implementing any system. When I was at 3-Step, I implemented a warehouse management system for a company that's the biggest Adidas reseller in the United States. And you have people, all the salespeople, the people working in the warehouse. You've got the executive team, the accounting team. You've got the process. So how do you take a sales order and pick all the goods from the warehouse and then send them over to the production facility and then get them shipped to the customer? And then you have the tools, which in this case, before we started, everything was on paper. And now we're introducing this new tool where everything has to be logged and you have to put sales orders into a system. So if you don't keep everything balanced, a tool without people is useless. People without a tool is slow, inaccurate, inefficient. And if you don't have a process down beforehand, then you're just kind of building into the abyss with a blindfold on. So it's a very delicate balance, but I feel that Bentley, particularly the well-rounded education I got, is what contributed to understanding that balance and continuing to refine it. So that's the presentation. I have a kind of list here of the high-level points that I talked about. I want to answer any questions or drill into more detail. I tried to, believe it or not, that was me trying to keep it high level. A lot of it is anecdotal, so you have to kind of take this with everything else you hear about startups and entrepreneurship. This is my story. A year ago or 2 years ago, 2019, I was a student at Bentley and have now worked at 2 startups. I have a lot of other entrepreneurial ideas on the side as well. So any questions or input, I am more than happy. I'd like to talk about and continue the conversation. So that is that. Thank you. Anybody? Any questions? Let me see if I can see.
See if anybody wants to just turn your cameras on so we can see who's here, and say hi to Jake and ask some questions. If not, we'll ask you some questions.
Hello, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
I was just wondering if you ever felt, I guess, unsatisfied, or like, because you mentioned how you continually had the process of throwing ideas to the door, and continually creating ideas, right? And did you ever feel unsatisfied, or like how's the mental game like with ideas that didn't work, and what propelled you to keep going and kept you motivated?
Yep. Yeah, so absolutely. And there are the ups and downs, especially feedback. When you're getting feedback, the biggest thing I learned was to go outside friends and family when you look for feedback, because oftentimes if you have a cool idea and you show your friends and family, you might get a biased opinion. So you keep investing more and more time into that concept. I was never really at a super low coming out of an idea. I tried to start several companies that ended up not going so well. I'm working on companies now that are going up and down. So for me, it's always this what keeps me going is the idea that at the worst possible case, I'm learning. So I learn a lot about, and I meet a lot of people. So that's what keeps me going, is no matter how many times I fail. And I tell people around me right now, is people think, some of my friends think I'm crazy because every time I talk to them, it's, oh, what's Jake got this time? What business idea is he talking about this time? For me, I'll keep doing it forever. I'll fail for the rest of my life, because failing is, I like failing. And that again, that's my perspective. It's not, I don't want to project that that's how everybody feels about it, but you just have to kind of figure out what it is and why you feel like you're an entrepreneur, why you want to do it. Isolate that thing. You can create a dream board, which I experimented with. So put your dreams up on a board, and every time you fail, look at the board as a constant reminder of where you want to be. I like to listen to a lot of entrepreneurs that have failed. So podcasts are great, where you can kind of listen to two brilliant people talk about their successes and failures, and you'll learn, oh, you know what? Other people fail. Other really smart people fail as well. So I would say that's a general gist there. Any other?
I have a question. Yeah. How important was it surrounding yourself with like-minded individuals when you were going through different projects and stuff?
I think it's super, super important. I was lucky. I found a good group of people at Bentley, a lot of different people. So I worked on different projects with different groups. When I was trying to start the hedge fund concept, I didn't know anything about finance. I knew a lot about kind of tech, but I didn't know anything about finance. And I had this idea for a set of trading rules that I wanted to build with. But since I didn't know anything about finance, I put a post in the Bentley investment group and said, hey, is there anybody interested in helping me? Because I don't know anything about finance, but I know about technology. And I found another student who I'd never met before, wasn't my friend, and he knew a lot about finance. And we partnered up and ultimately started a company to kind of build out this set of trading rules. So it's one thing to have people that encourage you and also think like entrepreneurs, whether it's your friends or you have a group at school you go and hang out with, or a group me. I was in the Bentley blockchain group me because I was interested in cryptocurrencies. So it's one thing to be surrounded by people that are like-minded, but it's also important to find people that have complementary skills to you. So if you're really technical, you could partner up with someone who's not necessarily technical, but becomes your domain expert. They're really good at whatever industry you're trying to go into. And vice versa. So if you're not a really technical person, or that's not where you like to live, then you could partner up with a technical person. And to plug the sandbox, that's one of the great things about the sandbox, being completely genuine, is that you have people working there that are really interested in being innovative and taking a technical route. So you should always feel free to go there and kind of share your ideas, because it is an innovative space. It's an incubator of sorts. That's where one of the companies I'm working at right now on the side, like one of my entrepreneurial endeavors, started in the sandbox with Mark. We're working with the career services department at Bentley, or one of the women in the career services department at Bentley. And so that it's always, they're always there. They're all around you. So just finding that group. But short answer would be very important. Find those people, keep searching, grow your network, so on and so forth, yada, yada, yada. That would be the answer there.
Thank you.
Yep.
What's happened to some of the prior companies that you started while you were here at Bentley? What's your involvement in them? Are they still around? Are they making you millions? Did you shut them down? What happens to a startup company after you move on? After you're ready to move on to the next one?
It depends on what you're doing and what you've built, and how you've formed the company. So one thing I will caution against that I did a lot was, as soon as you have an idea, buy all the domain names, create an LLC, which in Massachusetts you pay $500, and you're going to be on the Secretary of State's website, and you can get an employer identification number and file paperwork. So that's, if you want evidence of what's left of some of the companies I started in high school and in Bentley. If you go on the Massachusetts Secretary of State website and Google or search Jake O'Connell, you'll see the laundry list of companies that have been started and dissolved. But the important thing is that, so based on everything I started at Bentley, really the only one I'm still working on actively is the career center application. So it's called CareerX. We're building a virtual career center, or kind of workshopping what that might look like. We started with cover letters, so automating the process of for students to create cover letters that follow the right format and making that process easier. So I'm still working on that. The hedge fund concept, we didn't dissolve the hedge fund, the last hedge fund that we started senior year. It's called Oliver Ridley. It's still a thing technically. My plan is always to circle back to fintech. I really like quantitative finance. I love it. That's where I've felt the most alive. But I know that I'm going to get there one day. I'm working on that as a hobby because there are other projects that are interesting to me as well. So I don't let it bother me that my dream I know is probably a few years away, because every time I have free time, I'm working toward that goal. And my dream board, that's what I have on the dream board. So it's like I'm not sad about any of the companies that are dissolved, because the reason I'm at this new company is because one of the kids I worked with in one of those hedge funds that I never would have met if I hadn't sent that post in Bentley, the Bentley investment group, he's the one that his father is the one that started this new company. So if I'd never tried and failed, I wouldn't have had the network that I have now, where I've met all of these people and experimented with all these ideas. And that's opened a lot of other doors. So it's all positive at the end of the day. I have no regrets, despite some of the money that I spent along the way. But how technical is this? Are you guys all technical people, like programmers, like you think technically, or just generally interested in entrepreneurship, doing this because your professor told you to? Is there anybody who wants to talk more about? Yeah, I'm sure that there's. IT 101 is a great course. You know, it opens your eyes to what's possible. But the biggest thing I would say for those of you who aren't necessarily technical minded is that you don't have to be a geek, quote unquote, or a nerd. You don't have to call yourself a programmer. No matter what you do, you can use code. You can write in a different language that allows you to attain really miraculous results. And it's not that hard to get started anymore. That's kind of the misconception that I feel I've seen talking to people, is that you don't have to take a programming course or do problem sets on LeetCode, or, I mean, they're great. That's not how I learn. I don't do any of that. I learn just by Google searching, how do I do this? And then looking at a Stack Overflow article, copying and pasting some code, testing it on your machine. And just, that's how I built everything I've ever built. I never read a book on programming. I only took 2 programming courses while I was at Bentley. I don't call myself a programmer when people ask, but I write code. So I don't know if you guys think I'm a nerd. I'll leave that to you. There's nothing wrong with that. I think it's cool. We're the new rock stars. You can be a geek with a $70 million house and make a lot of friends. Kidding. But yeah, does anybody want to drill into any technicals or talk any other questions regarding entrepreneurship broadly? Anything like that?
So, Tyler, I'm curious what parts of Jake's presentation you identify with at all in terms of your own ideas about a career. Do you see yourself doing anything like he's doing, or do you see yourself working in a different kind of environment? That might be a more traditional corporate environment.
I'm not really sure. Like, I've always had an interest in like this type of stuff. Like, I've always been into startups and stuff like this, but I've never really been able to I want to start learning how to code. I always thought it was like something that was out of reach for me, but like, I mean, I guess I just gotta like dive into it and see what I can do.
And you will, which is cool.
Correct. And just to touch on that, I know I'm talking a lot, but I've thought the exact same thing about code. I was bad at it. I was bad at math. Like I don't think like an engineer, other than that I think like an engineer. So it was always this misconception in my head that it was unapproachable. I'm not a programmer. I don't know how to optimize an algorithm. I don't even know what an algorithm is. But all you do is just start Google searching and you'll get there. The biggest thing is building a prototype. If you can get people behind a prototype, then you can be the visionary and you can go find people who know a lot more about code and help them work together to build your vision in an actual application, that goes back to the prototyping concept. Is none of the buttons in my app really worked that well, but it looked really cool, and showed people what's possible. So you can duct tape it together if you need to.
Other questions or thoughts before we stop?
Mark, can I comment? Jake, great to see
Yeah,
you.
yeah, I was the director
Good to
of
see you
Pulse
as well.
Recognition
I'm with the
at-
career center, everybody else. You might potentially see the cover letter X if you take CDI 101, but
Yeah.
great, the enthusiasm. I love it all. I have two questions. Is this your life?
Please.
Is this your life 24/7? So in the sense that, in a good way, your personal things you enjoy and work kind of all blend together, it sounds like. Is that true?
Absolutely.
And that's
Yeah.
that people is not working, that is living. That's awesome. And Jake, second question, with fintech being your goal, do you see yourself getting there entrepreneurially? Like as in
Ideally, yes. I've looked into, I think there's nothing wrong. And at one point I was dead set on going to work for a quantitative hedge fund as an engineer or a developer. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's awesome if you can get your foot in the door. It's super competitive. But yeah, my goal is to look at the world differently, taking all the experience that I've gathered through these other roles and do that in some entrepreneurial way. And it doesn't have to be a hedge fund. I've thought about a lot about kind of building a data aggregating platform for social arb. If anybody's ever been exposed to that, go follow Dumb Money on YouTube. For anybody who's interested in investing and doing it, kind of looking at it differently than Wall Street looks at things. So I'm just kind of, that's why I know it's a few years down the line, because every time I do something, I start to think about how this will apply and what transferable skills I'm working on. And that's why that's why it's awesome to do this job, because I'm learning about all these different tools I can use to get to that fintech goal entrepreneurially. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted. I don't know. Yeah.
One thing you learned from this.
what'd you
Say
say,
it one more
Mark?
time.
I was calling Gabe, whose picture I see in the lower corner of my screen. What's one thing you learned today?
Well, one of the things I think I'm most attached to in his presentation was talking about when he was able to discover that he didn't like working in the corporate world. I feel like that's a very valuable thing to learn. I think you said that happened in high school even.
Yeah.
I mean, just personally, I'd love to have an experience like that, just to see if I like the corporate world or not, just like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And not all corporate worlds are alike. I spent a whole summer there, and I was at this critical point in my life where I was eyes wide open. And so you could have, like, working at Google is definitely different than working at a big engineering company in Waltham. So it's hard for me. It was just like, when you know. So you should always go into it with an open mind, because you can have an awesome career working at a company that's not technically a startup, for sure. But if you get that kind of itch and you start thinking, like, that's what it's, the entrepreneurial itch is, you'll know when you know, and getting that early internship experience, that's what's going to tell you, or at least start to get those gears cranking in your head. So that's a great point.
Kirsten, how about you?
I just thought it was cool to learn from an entrepreneurial side of things with the tech side. I actually, my concentration's in entrepreneurship too, but for different reasons. I like to cook and bake. So hopefully someday I might do a bakery or a restaurant or something like that. But it's nice to hear things from a different perspective in a different department. So I appreciated it.
Being with us today, Zach, how about you? Any reaction, or what are you thinking after listening and participating today? Zach's screen is frozen, or else he blinked.
Oh, sorry.
Well, there you are.
I think just the whole startup work style is pretty interesting. How the roles are kind of not super defined, and also how it's just a part of a team that is yeah, and also just the picking like small goals, not just reaching for like super huge goals at the start.
Good lesson to learn. Thank you. Max. Max, good help here.
Yeah. Probably for me is how you got to, like, how you made connections to get the opportunity to work or where you are now within the startup was really like eye-opening, because a lot of the opportunities you've had wouldn't have come about if you weren't networking and looking for other individuals to work with.
Right. That's a huge part of it. Like expanding your network and looking for people that might have those connections, because then the doors kind of open themselves. You just show people you're a hard worker and you're interested, and boom. I mean, I'm not saying it's that easy. I got lucky in a lot of cases too, but it is. It's all about connections and networking and family, friends, anything.
Well, I think, Jake, put your LinkedIn info in the chat so folks want to follow you can do that if you're
Yes.
open to that. Abby,
Absolutely.
What's your perspective on this session today?
I really liked how you approached the topic about failure. I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs or people in the business world in general are like, they shy away from that and only talk about their big successes. But I think our failures are kind of what we learn from, and it's really just as important as the successes. So, yeah.
Good, thank you.
Yeah.
Hi,
Great
Colleen.
point.
Ben.
Yeah, I really liked when he was talking about how like just throwing stuff at a wall and see what sticks, like just putting yourself out there fully. Like I really like grasped that concept.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just pasted Jake's contact info in case you want to follow him on LinkedIn. Andrea.
Yeah, I like how he explained that to be in business and with technological, you don't necessarily need to be like the best at coding and all of that stuff.
Absolutely. Very true. You just have to problem solving thinking.
Ken.
I would say that how he wasn't like.
I like that everybody's talking about Jake in the third person, like as if he's not in the room.
How he said he didn't make those lemonade stands and stuff, and he kind of realized that this was kind of his calling a little bit later on. I thought that was very interesting.
Is this someplace where you might see yourself in 5 or 6 years?
Yeah, because I'm a CIS major right now, and entrepreneurship was like definitely one of the things I was also interested. So I could see myself similar in his shoes.
Good to know. Nick.
Hi.
Hi, Nick.
Hi. I just loved how you talked about Bentley and the network that Bentley has, and how we have to take advantage of that. I think I'm a transfer student, so being in a small college, it helps a lot, and having more opportunities and just being a business school, I think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Max, do you want to say anything? Max Renisi, do you want to say anything? Did I miss you?
Oh yeah, I was tutoring in here for a lot of it, so I got bits and pieces. But I just think the fact that like I feel like a lot of people, when they want to be entrepreneurs, like they wait for the right thing and like for the right time, but just kind of like doing something and just getting yourself out there is pretty important.
Absolutely. See what sticks.
And 2 other announcements. Colleen, want to say hi and say hello to us? It's good to have you here. Colleen also works in career services.
Hi, Colleen. I think you're on. There she is. Hello.
Can you hear me, Jake?
Yes, good to go.
Awesome. How are you? Mark, great to see you. I'm
You
sure
guys
everybody learned a tremendous amount from Jake. He is so talented.
Nope,
Okay,
just
we'll stop
lucky.
there.
Yeah, that's it.
So I have 2 more announcements to make. about some other things. If you enjoyed this presentation, you're going to enjoy a couple more. First of all, coming up, talking about permission to fail, the CIS Sandbox and Career Services together are sponsoring a program in a couple of weeks with presenters from iRobot, the people who make the Roomba vacuum cleaner. This was really popular last year, so we're thrilled that they're back this year to talk about a program called Permission to Fail. And they'll also be speaking about their careers and how they got where they are. The info for that I'll put in the chat when we're done, but please come to that. And then next week's speakers are Connor McDonald, Connor Charlebois, and Nick Henschel from Wayfair and Mendix, talking about scaling for Fortune 500s and bridging the gap and winning big in the workplace. Jake, it's awesome to have you back here in the Sandbox, and thank you for joining us today, and thanks to everybody else for being with us as well. Here's the info about the robot program, and you'll get the information about the other two if you follow the Sandbox on Instagram. Follow CIS Sandbox on Instagram. We've been posting these up every week, so you have the info on them.